21. Bye.
Okay, good morning. This is Wednesday, May 7th, in Senate Natural Resources and Energy. And we are joined this morning by Rep. James, Chair of House Energy and Digital Infrastructure.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and we're going to be chatting about S50 and the changes you all made. Great. So, yeah, looking forward to hearing about it.
And I think it's.
Oh, okay, great. Oh, excellent. So we'll just start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone has to.
Oh, I do, yeah. And you've met everyone.
I have,
Yeah. Okay, all right, so go ahead, take
Great.
it.
So, yeah, thanks for having me in. I'm really glad that, you guys are gonna be moving this along in hopes that we can get it across the finish line this year. We're a very thorough committee, especially as a new committee. So it actually works to our benefit sometimes because we really start at the beginning. So we took a lot of testimony on S50 and we worked on it for a long time. And the bill that we brought to the floor on the House side came out of our committee 9-0. So we worked hard to get a tripartisan consensus on the underlying bill and then on some of the changes that we made. So I'm just looking at as passed the House, and it did also pass the House, by the way, on a decent waste flow. We didn't do a roll call. But there was a lot of support, I thought, for the underlying bill. So on page 2, you can see, and you guys had sent us over some language that would have allowed us, a property owner who puts in a net metering system, to change their mind or reassign that rec once in perpetuity. So if they discover that they made a mistake, their solar installer checked the wrong box, or they decide they didn't mean to keep the rack and they want to give it to the utility, which would be by far, I think, the most common. I don't think we have a lot of small property owners who want to be trading in racks, but so if somebody discovers they accidentally kept it and they want to give it back to the PUC in order to receive those more favorable rates, you had allowed a one-time reassignment kind of forever. Whenever you discover it, you can do it. We took a decent amount of testimony from the PUC, but mostly from the utilities. And the utilities thought that might be a little bit unwieldy because they build recs into their budgets and their planning. So to know that these things could be shifting, they didn't love as much. So we went with a 120-day period. So that gives property owners time to, most importantly, to get a couple of bills and say, wait a second, where are my savings? This isn't what I expected. This isn't right. So that's where we landed on that. It's a 4-month period, and then after 4 months, he would have to bring an appeal to the PUC, and it would be a lot harder. That's page 2. You'll see all your changes, obviously, on page 3. Ledge Council can explain this better than I can, but the reason on lines 8 and 9 you even see that language there at all is my understanding is that somewhere along the way in the long history of the net metering project, this actually dropped out of statute and it just became only a rule thing. You feel free to ask Ellen about that. But we didn't spend much time on this because it was reestablishing something in statute that somehow had gotten dropped out over the years and it existed only in rule. And so we're simply putting back into statute what we've been talking about in the underlying bill. On page 3 under rulemaking, simply says to the PUC what we all know, which is that if this bill passes, the PUC needs to update its rules to reflect the new changes. And that something that you guys have put in, but you just see it underlined here for ledge council reasons, which is that, people can go ahead and start doing this while PUC engages in more lengthy rulemaking process. So people aren't gonna have to wait months or a year in order to start doing 25 is the new 15. Page 4. As you all probably remember, in current law, there's a series of setbacks depending on the size of the array. So, 100 feet for, a bigger system, 40 feet for a medium-sized system. And, currently in statute, there is no setback required for a system of 15 kilowatts or less. There's no setback. Your committee had taken the position, I think through a floor amendment from Senator Perchlik, that we wanted these small net metering projects to follow whatever is the local setback, if there are any. We took a fair amount of testimony, from the league, from a lot of solar installers, from Renewable Energy Vermont, saying that this might be complicated to follow and would result sort of in patchwork of setbacks. So in one community, you need this number of feet, in another community, you need this number of feet. So we worked with the league to do two things. One is we put in a statewide minimum setback where there had been none previously. So right now, there's no setback for these small systems at all. You guys had suggested town by town. We went with a 10-foot statewide consistent minimum setback. And in the end, we found broad agreement that this would be okay.
So the league was okay with this?
Yeah,
Okay, amazing.
yeah. And we talked about this a lot. The main thing we heard, and I know that Mr. Sterling's coming up next, but the main thing we heard that was, I thought compelling and landed with our committee as well, is that solar installers are very proactive about finding out where the town setback is. And abiding by that anyway. Because if there's a property dispute or a problem, they don't want to move these systems. So they're expensive to move. Nobody wants to try to pick up, a $45,000 solar array and move it back after a property dispute in a town that has setbacks. Also, you do not want these things to get clipped by a plow truck or something, or a utility truck. So what we heard primarily was that solar installers are very careful to keep these things out of whatever the local setback is. So the 10-foot is really primarily for communities that don't have setbacks, that don't have municipal zoning, and we currently have nothing. So we're trying to be more protective.
Question about that though, if
Yeah,
do we know if any municipalities have their own setbacks that this is usurping? Does that make sense?
yeah. I'm gonna let Peter speak to that.
Okay, that's fine.
We were trying to avoid the patchwork.
Yeah.
We were trying to be consistent. And we also, I did really hear solar installers when they said pretty much the first thing they do. When somebody wants to put a big, cause at the 25 kilowatts or even at the current 15 kilowatt size, this, at its max, this can be a decent sized array. Right? You'd have to have a decent sized yard, like I would not put one of these in my yard, cause there's no room. So the solar installers were convincing, I think, and saying, we don't wanna get into this. So the very first thing we do is see what the town setback is, and we're gonna abide by that. I think it would be a very rare circumstance in which a solar installer would say, well, here's the town setback, it's more protective, but we're gonna put it right at 10 feet and see if it pisses anybody off. I don't think he practices much. And then you can see us repealing the no setbacks on the bottom of page 4. Then page 6. Top of page 6 is something that you guys had already done, that double recording of with the town and the PUC. Do you guys remember that? That was actually your language. Oh, we did that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I can explain why we did this. So in, way back in the before times, before the Public Utility Commission had their BPUC system, so that's a place where you can go online right now and search and find any certificate of public good that's been approved, including through this expedited registration process. So back in the olden days, when a permit was issued for these smaller arrays, you would file with the land records of the town, so that if I were gonna buy your property, I might wanna see if there were like an approved solar permit pending or something, like I wanna know that, obviously. So you could go search it in the land records, and then the statute also required the installer, Peter, or the town? The installer. I have it in my notes, I'm sorry. It required either the installer or the utility to then say, this has been filed with the town, and the PUC, we're now going to alert you that this has been filed by the town. So there was this double reporting thing, which was creating on the PUC a feeling that they needed to always go back and close the loop and say, hey, did you file this with the town? Is this filed with the town? So it was burdensome for the PUC paperworky wise. We emitted only the requirement that you also had to let the PUC know that you had filed it with the town. The reason being is that this now shows up in both places through EPUC. You can search it at the town, you can search it at the EPUC, so anybody who's looking for these records can readily find them online. But we're not required to double check back of like, hey, I filed it with the town. Hey, I filed it with the town. You guys can discuss that if you want, but it just felt redundant to us. Okay, and then here's the big thing. The definition of plant in statute, and I am gonna turn to my notes for this. We took a lot of testimony about the definition of plant. So I'm on page 6 now, section 5, that's included. We dropped that whole thing in on you guys. So in statute, a plant is a solar array and or project, solar project, and I'm literally reading from my floor notes here, so forgive me. So right now, these projects, a group of projects is considered a single plant if it uses common infrastructure. Okay, so roads, poles, wires. And this statute was important in its time to keep solar developers from kind of quote unquote, gaming the system. So in other words, from putting in a bunch of 4.99 megawatt systems and saying, all in the same field and saying, we qualify for standard offer. We qualify for standard offer. We qualify for standard offer, right under that cap. Nobody wanted that. However, since we've updated the res, and again, we've got other folks who can speak more knowledgeably, but since we have updated the res, this system gaming is a lot less relevant. And the concern is that we are now slowing, prohibiting, or otherwise making it harder to do what I think everybody agrees we want to do, which is to put bigger solar projects on places that already have them, on places that are already disturbed, on brownfields. So if we're going to be adding solar, we want to make sure that we're putting it land use wise, I guess, in places where it's already there. So we took a ton of testimony. We could not land. The PUC offered to get a group of stakeholders together, do a big workshop, and come back to us in November with a proposed updated definition of single plant And we were very clear about what we want that updated definition to include. So we wanted to facilitate the co-location of these bigger plants on sites where they already exist. So you can see us here asking the PUC to take into account the land use benefits of doing this. The ability of the PUC to make sure they're comprehensively reviewing them, which is where the PUC was coming from as well. And then see if there's any ratepayer impacts. And that, my colleagues, is what we did to the bill.
Right, super. Any questions for Chair James? Okay, I think I had one lingering question. This point about, page 3, this part where, like lines 5 and 6, the rules shall establish expedited. Oh, no, wait, no, that was not it. No, it was actually, I'm sorry, it was page 3. I think I just need one more time. So section 2, we're wanting people to be able to move forward before the rules are updated.
Yeah, so.
Yeah,
So upon passage,
yep,
people can start doing this
okay,
while the PUC engages in the public, transparent, hey, we're doing this rulemaking process.
got you.
So people can start doing this right away
Right,
while the PUC updates the rules to reflect
right.
what's happening,
Yeah.
what's gonna be happening.
It's pretty straightforward. Like it's pretty clear. All right, super, thank you.
Great.
All right.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate the chance to come in. Hope we can get this one done. Because, we really worked hard in my meeting and I know vote. All right.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Hey.
And to have it be good policy. Sorry,
Yes.
we need to.
Yeah, no,
All right.
I think that's fair. All right, thank you. And so,
Thank you.
one,
Thanks very much.
thank you. We have one potential further proposal of amendment to this to S50, and we have legislative council. Welcome.
Legislative Council. So Rec James did mostly do the walkthrough.
Indeed.
Overall, there weren't many changes from what you asked. One of the changes where the House differed from your bill is addressed in the proposal of amendment. So do you want me to start there? Or where did you?
Well, perhaps if there is anything further to say about the House proposal of amendment, let's start there. And if there's no further questions about that, then we'll move on to this amendment.
Yes, I was thinking, this is good.
Yeah, okay, okay.
I would say that the House tweaked both of the floor amendments that you had, but still in the same realm. So didn't differ, but just tweaked and clarified the floor amendments, and then added that section 4 and section 5. Section 4 also references the 15 becoming 25, and also removes that submitting proof of reporting the land records to the PUC. And section 5 is that stakeholder group on the definition of land. So largely similar to what your committee had passed. The other change, though, was the other floor amendment from Senator Perchlik, which is on page 2, about net metering customers keeping or transferring their recs. And so the House language allows the customer to change the decision to retain or transfer the recs once in the 120-day period after the net metering system is commissioned.
Are you transitioning into that amendment?
Yeah, I was gonna remind you what you had approved as a core amendment.
So I do have a question about section 5, the stakeholder group.
Sure,
Um,
so I was just,
Okay, you go ahead.
the floor amendment was slightly different than what is on page 2. It was just allowing them to change their decision to retain or transfer the recs once, but only for the small systems of 25 or less. And so it got rid of that size requirement. And as any customer moving forward, they have 120 days to change their rec if there's a mistake or a misunderstanding about whether or not they want to keep or transfer their recs to the utilities. The issue there, of course, is the prices they earn, they get back in the rate. So if they keep their recs, they get less money than if they transfer them to the utility. Makes sense.
Thank you.
But yes, if you wanna.
Did we have, was it 120-day period that?
You did not have a time.
Right, it was in
You just said-
perpetuity.
because the floor amendment from Senator Perchlik was. At any time in the future, one time they could change their decision, and this is more of, if after the system comes online, they notice on their bill that, hey, it's not what they wanted, they can have 120 days to make a change.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Yes.
Yes.
I wasn't gonna make an issue of that because but since we're doing an amendment anyway. That's still a tight timeframe. I'd rather go with like 6 months, go 180 days.
September 2nd. You're talking about September 2nd.
No, so,
So-
no,
The 120 days have to.
Oh, 120, okay.
I actually like the one. For a long time. The purchase and.
Yeah.
Then what happens is
One of the two.
2 years from now, I decide that I want to transfer to my son or my mother.
Well, this is still also one time.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's one, it's one.
It's still once.
Has to be quick, and I.
But 120,
You have a window
right.
because purchase amendment said you could change it anytime in the future. You want it anytime in the future rather than a window.
So, sometimes life gets chaotic and things go by, so 4 months is actually not that long. And having a little bit more time to actually realize and be able to file would be. I just don't know.
Yeah.
I don't see any.
180 days.
Yeah, and I don't see in front of me the argument about this happening and changing, being a burden for the PC and their planning, or it doesn't, we're talking about, you can't imagine it. It's what we can hear from.
Right, well, and I think it may,
But we're gonna do it anyway,
we may, want to hear from the distribution utilities about that, specifically because I think what I heard was that it was the distribution utilities budgets that end up planning around that. But let's keep going for now, and noted. So anything else before I jump to 5?
no,
Go ahead. Okay, on section 5, so this is an added stakeholder group. Is it your sense, or was there conversation to you about if this would add any cost? And there's no needed appropriations. Okay,
no.
great. Okay, great. So thank you. Let's take a look at this amendment.
Sure, so it is posted on your website for today, and I do believe it's in the calendar. So it's being offered by Senator Watson. And so it's a new section 1A, but it's related to that topic of net metering credits. So the Public Utility Commission shall allow a customer who owns a net metering system that was commissioned between January 1, 2023 and July 1, 2025 to change the customer's decision to retain the attributes once. The customer shall be allowed to transfer the attributes to the utility by submitting a request to the PUC by September 2nd, 2025. Do you want to speak to this?
Sure, yeah, no, I can, so, we have Senator Perchel coming in a little later to speak about this, so I may be stealing a little bit of what he will say, but he and I both have, constituent who made a mistake, in the past, and as a result is now having to, pay more than he thought he was going to have to pay. And so this, what we are affording folks in this page 2, right now it's a window of opportunity to make a change one time. So that language was not, that language was only moving forward into the future. And so we wanted to give our constituents or anybody else going back to 2023 an opportunity to make a change if they happen to have made a mistake. So it's a very narrowly, the intent here was to be as narrow as possible. It gives folks till September 2nd to make that change. If, you know, in the past, they would like, you know, if they made a choice that they're not happy with now. Any questions about? Yeah.
Just, so the bill's effective on July 1st, I think, September 2nd. Is that enough of a window, or should you?
Well, this, at least
Time or?
At least this person is aware that we're having this conversation and
Okay, so it's that narrow.
yeah, it's that narrow, you know, because the goal is keep it really tight. And so if somebody has been unhappy, that they would know.
Okay.
Let's see. So, yeah.
Why, so about, why, only back to 23?
Mostly to keep all the parties involved happy with this language. Does that make sense?
So, yeah.
Yeah.
What happens if my neighbor's got a 25-watt system, they sell the property, then now they can't transfer those credits?
Sorry, are we talking about your neighbor
I'm talking about my neighbor.
and your neighbor sells?
Correct.
So this is about the recs.
Yeah.
It's not about transferring ownership of the system to a new owner. It's just about the recs going to the utility that the system is connected to. And right now, the majority of people who use net metering transfer the recs to the utility.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, any other questions? Anything else you want to add, Ellen? Okay. So we are gonna hear from some other folks about this. So we'll go to them, and then if you want to raise questions about some of these other issues, now would be the about one of the.
Yeah, sorry, you were asking about municipal setbacks. So
Yes.
so currently under statute, municipal zoning cannot regulate energy systems. And so the fact that solar developers are looking at them is sort of like an over and above thing that they're doing. They are not required to. And so Senator Perchlik's amendment created a bit of a conflict because it conflicted with the fact that generally municipal zoning can't regulate systems.
I see.
And so the PUC has language in section 248 that says statewide setbacks for solar systems, and that's why the House went with the statewide language. Also, town setbacks really do range. Some towns have pretty large setbacks for property boundaries, and so it really does vary. And so so that was another thing too, and because they currently don't have any that are specific to solar, and that would have been preventing them from adopting one specific to solar, the House went with the statewide piece statute.
And what's the right phrase there? The municipal zoning cannot regulate
Energy systems.
energy systems. Okay.
I'll check the book, but I think it's
Okay. No, that's fair. I just wanna-
energy generation systems, something like that, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Thanks. Okay. All right, so we have Mr. Sterling, welcome.
I'm gonna turn this around, because I know that
You know who you are.
it confuses me.
Yeah. Thank you, now it's all clear for me. Yeah.
Peter Sterling, guest from Renewable Energy Vermont. Thank you so much for having me. Rev agrees with all the changes made in the House. Just to put a finer point on the setbacks piece, the distance that the House committee adopted was proposed by the League of Cities and Towns, when Rev agreed that there's important to, as an industry to self-regulate, and we thought those were entirely reasonable setbacks, so we were happy that the league was engaged, and I think it's entirely reasonable to have that statewide. Jude, I emailed the presentation, I don't know if we get far, I just wanted to walk through the one thing that's new to you that I think is actually really significant as far as that Chair James mentioned about single plant as far as good land use policy by providing solar to already disturbed environments. I threw a couple slides up there. If I see those behind me. So.
Sorry, Peter.
Oh, no,
You sent it yesterday.
I got kind of on top of things.
You were, and I wasn't. There you go. I have to convert it to a PDF. Can't.
Oh, okay, so I'll just start, so. Back before we did res reform. And you know, 2009, 2000, you know, up till 2020. There were two programs in Vermont, standard offer and offsite net metering, that could have potentially paid higher than market rates. More than what a utility might want to pay on their own, because the legislature said, we want to see solar, but let's incentivize it. And the PUC, I think rightly came up with this idea called single plant, that you cannot group a bunch of these net metering projects on the same parcel. So instead of building a 1 megawatt thing at a lower rate, you built 50 20s and got the higher rate. That was a reasonable rule to put in to stop developers from gaming the system. And that single plant worked very well, and I think it had its intended effect. But when when res reform passed, we eliminated offsite net metering was eliminated. These big 250 kWs, 500s, they were eliminated. That was one way to game the system was eliminated. In addition, as this committee just had a little discussion earlier this session, standard offer is gone. It doesn't seem like it's going to be reauthorized. So currently, I don't believe there's any future programs that we can see coming that would allow developers to chop up a bigger project into smaller projects that would allow for gaming the system. And so there was a discussion in the House Energy to amend the single plan that would include protections against any future gaming of the system in any way, but allows good solar projects to be co-located where there's already a solar. And as soon as my slide gets up, there'll be no rush.
It's on the website.
Oh, okay.
You have to accept. Zoom links for Peter.
I will accept Zoom link.
Let's see.
There is a lot of technology right there for me.
Mhm.
Is it an email?
Yes.
Is this is on our website?
Yeah, it's on the website.
Okay,
They can-
sorry
they can
about
just pull it up.
My bad. Okay, so the first slide is what I just reviewed about at the end of offset net metering in the standard offer program. The single plat statute adds time, cost, and uncertainty in the process of deploying solar in already built environment without any other benefits to ratepayers. It's also a barrier to sound land use management because it prevents municipalities from potentially locating solar in areas they prefer not to see it. They prefer, to see it sited. So that first, the second slide. So with standard offer, I think as Rep. James mentioned, you know, if you had a 5 megawatt field that can hold a 5 megawatt, you know, which is over the standard offer limit, you could chop it up into 2.2s and potentially get a higher rate. That is gaming system. That should not be allowed. And again, in that example 2, if you can see on that second slide, if you had that 5 megawatt field array and you chop a quarter of it off into a 500 kW, which clearly pays a higher rate, that's gaming the system. That should not be allowed. I think we'll all agree to that. But if you go to the next slide, so what currently happens because it's on the books, and I'm not saying the PUC is doing anything wrong here, but they have to follow the law that's on the books. So this picture to you on the right there is an old gravel pit in Hardwick, and a 2.3 megawatt solar array was built. And now you can't use all the rest of that gravel pit to the north, or you could use it, but it might be prohibitively expensive because you have to build a new road, put new wires in. You can't use all the pieces of infrastructure that would maybe make the project affordable. So we're trying to, you know, change the single plan law so you could locate new projects that again are market rate projects next to other projects and use all this infrastructure. And I can give you a more specific example. in the fourth slide. The one that's got a map on it, that looks like that a little bit. Oh, there it is. Oh, Jude, great job. Okay, so that's the gravel pit in Hardwick, and you can see all that. We want to be able to put solar, this is a site that the town already agrees is good. It's already been permitted. It makes a lot of sense to put more solar on that site as opposed to somewhere else. Then my second to last slide, Jude, if I could just, this one I'll hone in on. So in this one, you can see number one, on a site designated by the town of Bennington as a preferred site for solar. MHG Solar was advised by its lawyers to conclusively demonstrate that their new solar project shared no common infrastructure with the 500 kW project on the same parcel installed 5 years prior. So they were asked to build that new road in red next to the road in blue at a cost of over $50,000 just to prove that they weren't a single plant. There was no need to build a new road there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know, going back.
Yeah, I don't understand, and I'm sorry, I missed Alan's spiel, sorry, Alan.
I didn't talk
Okay.
that long.
You didn't talk about this? Okay, good, then I just really don't understand, well, how does the road show that it's not a single plant, like why are they requiring road?
Because if you go to the first slide, you can see in the definition of plant. There it specifically says a definition of plant includes common infrastructure such as roads, poles and wires, connection facilities and connections.
So if it's the same road that's connecting the two of them, that's considered common infrastructure. So they're literally building roads in places where we might not want them to build roads. People feel very strongly about building roads in the legislature, as true.
And driveways.
Driveways.
Driveways. It's almost that, even though I'm a covered park. Yeah, park.
Oh.
So yes, we do.
Okay, I see.
And we want to try to, and also I have to say, but part of this, even if the road was, in an okay spot, it's just at unnecessary cost.
Yeah.
Which nobody needs, and if you look at number 2 there, to avoid a single plant conflict, another solar developer told me they were advised by their lawyers, and again, I'm not saying the PUC is doing anything wrong, they have to follow the statute. They were advised by their lawyers to be able to rebut the single plant presumption. They had to pull out utility poles for an existing project, replace that they put in 2 years before they literally could use the exact same poles, but they had to go through the replacing poles and build that into the cost to prove it was not using common infrastructure. That's the only stuff, the kind of thing we're trying to avoid.
So can I ask another?
Yes.
So where in the bill are you trying to deal with this situation?
So,
And what is the language?
okay, so on the last page, the second to last page, you can see starting on line 11. That the House asked the PUC to get input from stakeholders.
Oh, it's just a report.
It's recommended language, there was, some concern about unintended consequences and
Yeah.
discussion. We all feel like there's a way to get to yes on this. We at Rev are committed to having single plant language that would allow the co-location for things, not that on the last, but like the last slide.
Yeah.
But there should not be any way for a developer to make extra profit or to impact rates by doing this. It should really be about sound land use, to use already developed land or a disturbed land to put more solar on that. That's what we are going for. So fix problems like extra roads there without impacting ratepayers or allowing for what some may say a gating the system.
Okay.
So on the last slide. Thank you. So we can see S50 directs PC to recommend to Senate Natural Resources and Energy and the House Energy and Infrastructure Committee heading. Right about first, a new definition with input from stakeholders. With the end of the offset net metering and standard offer program, there's no longer really any justification for the existing single plant definition, and you can see most land use advocates were in support of this change. So I'm happy to answer any questions about why this is a good idea to be followed.
They would tell us by November, and then we could do something next year, maybe if we decide it's good idea.
That's correct.
I like that.
And you don't have any comments about this 120-day window to make a change?
Well,
If you,
I would say that the only thing, we didn't really weigh in, 120 days is 4 months, that means someone's gotten 4 utility bills.
Mhm.
It seems like a bunch of time to notice. I mean, I'm not disregarding your point that people are busy and the mail has on, you know, your bill in time. I mean, that's what the House decided on based on their testimony they took, and 4 months of bills seems like a bunch, but, you know, I don't know.
And any thoughts on this proposed amendments? Or-
It seems like a reasonable solution to the problem. I don't think that many people have made this mistake. This is like a pretty narrowly tailored solution to what is a pretty small problem, so we'll see move on with that.
Amazing, thank you.
Amazing, thank you for having me in, thank you, Judith.
I know what the vote was, did
Oh, yeah, she said it was 9-0. She worked really hard to get it to be 9-0, and then it passed on on the floor with she called it a decent voice vote.
Okay.
So, broad support,
Some people just don't like silver.
I guess. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, all right, and we have Senator Bushlight, welcome.
Thank you.
I can see something fast.
Yes.
Everybody
Where you have that?
Everybody but Andy first. Oh, it's a note from Second about how we're supposed to treat you nice.
Welcome, thank you for being here. And
Person from the Washington district.
we walked.
You're just about that, okay.
We walked in, yeah. So, I did also preface it with being like, we have this constituents,
Yeah,
but.
so yeah, so there is a critical nature to this request. I had a bill in, I think this committee, although there was only one person on this committee at the time where there was a separate bill just to deal with this. Almost got through the process. We thought we had a solution. There was just a snafu over the summer session. So this is an opportunity, this is a attempt to try to fix this problem for a mistake that was made by a local electrician filling out the form. There have been other mistakes where they have gone to the board and asked for a change. The board's rule is that this decision is irrevocable, so they have said, the rule says you can't change it, so they said no. People appealed, they said no, we meant that when we said irrevocable, that's what that means, so you can't, they're not allowing change. I think for this mistake, allowing them to make the change, and then you have it going forward for those that just happen to make a mistake, there is this chance a few months afterwards to correct the error. That's in the bill, so I appreciate the House work on the bill, and this would just allow that change to be made going forward, only for the 60 days after the bill is enacted. I think that's what it says.
Oh, it's 120. No.
The bill,
Oh, we're
I'm
talking.
talking about the amendment.
You can probably have some. The constituent,
Yeah. There is another person though, which is, I haven't talked to, because they're not a constituent, so they might also be aware of this.
For the 2 people in Vermont, this happened.
Yeah.
Yes, the time per constituent that the Senate has spent, or the whole legislature has spent on this is proportionate to your question.
You just have to remember for when we all come to you with amendments, they're like, what is
This one, yeah. Fair enough. Okay, any questions for Senator Bushlight? Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And, all right, we also have Mr. Faber from the Utility Commission, welcome.
Morning, folks. For the record, I'm Greg Faber. I work with the Public Utility Commission here on S50. We worked with the House Committee a lot on this bill. We offered a lot of testimony. We're fine with the final product here. We also have no objection to adding Senator Perchlik's amendment. I guess I wanted to talk a little bit about the 120-day period and why it's there. I think there's some confusion about RECs and the actual kilowatt hour credit you get on your bill. We're just talking about the RECs here. This doesn't affect the kilowatt hour distribution. Right. So if you are a net meter customer, let's say, and you decide to keep your RECs mistakenly, that means you're going to get less per kilowatt hour on your bill. So maybe you want to change that. Maybe you made a mistake, maybe your installer made a mistake for you. You want to change that. That's fine. There's a one-time opportunity to do it. This gives you 4 months of billing cycles to do it. What you want to avoid though is a person who's net metering, and maybe they have 10 net metering projects of 500 kilowatts. That's a large amount of recs they could have potentially, right? They could say, well, I'm going to play the market with those recs when the market for recs gets high. And then when the market for recs is low, I'm going to tell the utility, oh no, take back my recs and pay me that money. The utilities plan going forward for years at a time. They can't afford to have that kind of market playing in their system. That's why you want to limit this to a time certain. We had suggested 90 days. The House committee came up with 120. We're okay with that, but it's really got to be a time certain. You can't have this market playing, people going back and forth. It's not just small systems. This is potentially large systems and could really impact rates for ratepayers. So that's why that's important to have if you're going to have a one-time get out of jail free card, it's got to be limited. Okay. And as far as the amendment, like I said, we don't object to that. Otherwise, we're fine with the bill.
Okay, super. Any questions for Mr. Faber? Okay,
Thanks.
super. Thank you so much. Okay, any questions or concerns about the amendment from the House? Okay, any concerns or questions about the amendment? And by the way, it does have my name on it, and we'll have my name on it in the calendar, but Senator Pritchett did email to say that he would have his name on it, but it just came too late, so, which, for what it's worth.
But he's still up today, right?
Yes, so I'd love to do a straw poll on the amendment.
Sure about it.
Yes, all in favor? Okay, and opposed, and let's do a straw poll on the underlying bill, perhaps together with the amendment. So we don't need to vote it formally. So just a straw poll on the changes from the House. All in favor, raise your hand. Okay, and opposed? Okay. Great, so thank you, everybody. So we will be moving forward with that. Okay, so we're gonna switch. Oh, we are again running so fast. Okay. So just as a preview, there is a section in H 397, which is in Gov Ops right now. Just a flood related bill. There's one section that pertains to us in our jurisdiction about emergency dam operations. And so we're gonna get a drive-by on that from legislative counsel from Tucker Anderson. And we also have Ben Green from DEC to give us a little bit of background on his thoughts on it. And then for the rest of the day, we're gonna be looking at H 230 as it may be, again, language that we may want to consider for H 231. So we'll see how controversial it is. So that's the preview, but we don't have our next witness until 10:20. So we have half an hour of found time.
Oh.
How's that? Lovely. from a break. And we are going to be chatting about H397. We don't have possession, but want to be informed about it. So we have legislative counsel here with us, Mr. Anderson.
Good morning, Tucker Anderson, Legislative Council. You should have in front of you a proposed amendment from the Senate Committee on Government Operations for H397. I'll be working off of draft 1.1, which is posted on the GovOps webpage for last Friday. In particular, we're going to be taking a look at section 10. I think the agenda
on our page too.
I don't know if dam drawdowns will happen during subsequent COVID related as much as incident, but perhaps in the future flood, you'll have this. This proposes in the new subdivision 12A, if you're with me on page 9, to allow the governor in consultation with the Secretary of Natural Resources to authorize ANR to waive applicable permits and restrictions under 10 PSA chapter 47 or the Vermont water quality standards to allow dams within the state to draw down water levels in anticipation of a flood event. And there's a triggering clause here. It's a flood event that is likely to cause substantial damage or injury to persons who own property. So there will have to be some sort of soft finding there before this emergency council is altered the system. Waivers may only be issued if the governor, in consultation with the secretary, has significant reason to believe that doing so will decrease the risk of substantial damage to persons or property. So, secondary requirement there. First, the finding, and then an additional finding that drawing down the dam will decrease that risk. Dam operators operating under a waiver shall be required to make every effort to minimize the environmental impact of a water level drawdown. New language added within the government operations amendment. So what we just took a look at in subdivision 12A was in H397 as passed by the House. New subdivision B, dam owners that are authorized to use a waiver under this provision shall be required to develop a drawdown plan that is approved by the secretary prior to the implementation of the drawdown. The drawdown plan shall at minimum include hydrologic and hydraulic modeling of the dam, reservoir and downstream channel performed by an engineer experienced in dam safety engineering that improves the public safety benefit of the drawdown. Moving on to page 10. The plan shall include stormwater communications with downstream communities and applicable regulators, maximum safe reservoir drawdown rates and outflows, target drawdown elevation in the reservoir, refill plan if unable to achieve during the storm event, monitoring and reporting requirements of drawdown operations, and finally documentation of plan updates and revisions over time. Last one, maybe the only component that would ever be within my particular bailiwick, which is reconciliation. You're all likely more fluent with some of the references in here than I am, but just to orient you all, 10 VSA chapter 43 relates to the dams. There's also a dam safety rule. So chapter 43 is the dam safety chapter. There's different categories of dams that might be affected by this and those that will likely not be affected. So, for example, the dam safety program covers artificial barriers, non-power dams, non-federal dams. The PUC regulates non-federal power dams. FERC has the federal power dams, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has all of the federal dams outside of that.
I have a couple of questions, but I don't want to interrupt if you're still.
I'm ready.
Okay. I think I need, again, just a little context for this, because as I had understood this, like this language that's in 12A was existing law. moving here. Is that accurate?
No.
No, oh, okay. So this is,
How this presented in both the House bill where this came from and here, this is new authority being added for the purposes, again, of response to an all hazard event, which doesn't exist within the emergency powers of the governor currently.
right, but is it? The idea of emergency drawdowns exists. Not elsewhere in statute?
Perhaps not a novel concept, and there's some emergency powers related to permitting for power dams in the preceding subdivision of this section, which might be what you're referring to.
Okay,
And Michael O'Grady, perhaps being a more wise and experienced legislative counsel in the bill is introduced where this is taken from, included that preceding subdivision for purposes of context. And I don't do that because if the language isn't changing, I don't want to inadvertently introduce an error, so.
got you, okay, that's good to know. And this highlighted language on page 9, this is new, that's being discussed by GovOps.
Correct, and they actually haven't taken up this new language yet, so you're getting the first look. They posted it last Friday and then ran long and weren't able to actually discuss it.
Gotcha. Okay, and so this new language would sort of flesh out the process basically for.
It actually establishes a contingency that the emergency waiver of applicable permits couldn't take place unless the dam operator has this plan in place and is approved by the secretary.
Okay.
Prerequisite,
And
sorry.
is there, so one hypothesis is that it should stay here because it's under the emergency powers of the governor. Another hypothesis is that this kind of language could live in that the not exactly the emergency powers of the governor section, but rather a section more pertinent to dams about an emergency drawdown. But that's, I don't know if that was a choice that they were thinking about or if that matters.
It's not something they had discussed yet, again,
Okay.
because they haven't taken a dive into this section yet or any of the new language.
Right.
If it's something that this committee ends up recommending to government operations, I would probably only change the recommendation to state that the emergency powers the governor list should probably include some reference to this.
Yes.
If it's gonna move to Title 10.
Yes. Thanks. Okay, great, yes.
Just out of curiosity, so dam owner or that hasn't gone through the process, happened in new language. Can't draw down in an emergency,
The way that this is currently structured,
take the knock, it's a little odd, okay?
Okay,
this could be structured in a different way where dam operators are just required to have this plan in place in case of emergency. Apply the mandate. It's just there, and then the emergency powers of the governor and the secretary aren't constrained by the negligent dam operator that doesn't have a plan.
Yeah, it's a little. So theoretically, you could have an emergency, you know you need to do it, but. Not anyway, but you,
And
what you can't,
right, theoretically, you should have this plan, yeah.
yeah.
And ultimately, this is structured at the discretion of the dam operator anyway, because the emergency power that's being exercised by the governor and the secretary, at least in this language, is to waive applicable permits.
Okay.
Allowing the drawdown to happen without any potential violation of the water quality standard in chapter 47.
So the governor could waive the need for having such a plan?
Having the permits, but not,
But not,
right, the plan.
they still have to have it. Otherwise, they cannot. Alright, interesting. Okay, thank you. Unless there's more questions.
No, it just, I have to say it has the feel of not being ready for fun,
For what?
not being ready for fun.
Oh. Yeah, well, let's see if there's more thoughts on this. So, thank you very much. Okay, all right, and we are lucky enough to have Mr. Green. Welcome. Okay.
Good day, for the record, my name is Ben Green, I'm the section chief of the dam safety program at the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation. Thanks for the opportunity to come in today and talk about H397, particular drawdown during emergency flood event provision that's in this bill. I usually start out with giving a brief overview of our program. This is my third time in here this session, so I imagine I don't necessarily need to do that. But one thing I want to point out is pretty important is of our primary responsibilities of our program is that we regulate non-hydropower, non-federal dams. So dams that do not produce hydropower that goes to the grid, and dams that are not either federally owned or federally regulated. So those are not our regulatory purview. So we regulate roughly 1,000 dams statewide. In addition to that, there's roughly another 100 hydropower dams, of which 80 of those are regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission or FERC. And about 20 of those, at least currently, are regulated by the Public Utility Commission. Our program's regulatory authority is through Title 10 VSA Chapter 43 dams. So we're talking about dams are non-hydropower, non-federal. So just want to make that very clear. I'll talk about that a little bit in the presentation. So overall, our dam safety program recommendation or our position on this topic, and I'll just read it, is dam owners with dams that could provide public safety and flood reduction benefits from pre-flood event drawdowns through temporary waiver of environmental permits and regulations should be required to develop an approved drawdown plan that includes communications, drawdown rates, target flows and levels, as well as monitoring and reporting requirements. So in our view, this is potentially has a positive to it. However, not having any sideboards on it could have unintended consequences that could be negative. So in our mind, having some plan in place and thought how this would actually be done is a pretty important step. So just kind of list out a few of the pros and cons we see them of doing pre-event dam drawdowns. They're not currently, well, they're not done widely in Vermont. There are some dams that are currently doing them. I'll talk about that a little bit later. In other states, I would say they're more common than they are here. Some pros are that they could potentially reduce flood risk and flood load on dams. Dam overtopping due to large flood events is certainly for embankment style dams, which we primarily have here in the state. One of the most common dam failure modes. This is also an opportunity to potentially use existing infrastructure to help reduce flooding or attenuate flows, and also reduce, not only damage downstream, but also potentially damage upstream. Some of the drawbacks of doing this is, I think it's safe to say it's largely dependent on the dam configuration and the drainage basin. Most of our dams in the state are not purpose designed for flood control. So I think we have to be realistic about how effective this is going to be on a wide scale. There are certainly some dams I think it will be quite effective. There are others that I think will be marginally, if not at all, effective in be able to achieve this and really have a measurable flood reduction. Some other considerations or cons are that the reason why I want to do this in controlled ways, if a dam owner institutes drawdown rates that are too rapid, in certain cases that can actually cause damage to the dam. So you can do a pre-event drawdown and actually damage your dam. In addition, if you do it too quickly, you can have high outflows at a fixed orifice or a gate that could cause erosion or other issues and other damages that we don't want. We don't have a situation where you're trying to draw it down so fast it could cause other unintended consequences. There's always the risk of some of these outlet works that could be used, could be either stuck in an open position or you're stuck in a closed position. I'm not saying that's a likely thing, but it's a possibility where you can draw down further than you want, have a hard time destroying the water level post event, or you have the plan, but then you're unable to get your gate to work, so then you're not able to participate. It does require, diligent active management, so it introduces this human factor, to the equation. And then I think a common consideration or concern, at least of the agency and of others, is that, these drawdowns can potentially have negative impacts to aquatic ecosystems both in the reservoir and the downstream channel, because it would be fairly unnatural flow conditions, pre-event to be doing these drawdowns. And you see that I have a chart here that shows just the general dam purposes in the state of Vermont. Flood control is pretty far down on the list. We have very few purpose designed flood controls in the state. That's the green, it's 3%. We have our British Bureau of Flood Control dams, Waterbury, Wrightsville, East Barry. We have the core flood control dams in the Connecticut Basin. There's several natural resource conservation service designed, town of Ludlow owned flood control dams in the town of Ludlow. And with those few exceptions, those are the ones that are purpose designed flood control. Mostly, again, very prevalently, we have recreation dams, very prevalently we have hydroelectric dams, and then water supply dams are other things. So just some general considerations about this is that at the end of the day, dam owners do hold all the risk and liability of dam ownership, and they also hold all the risk and liability of dam safety and dam performance. So if there's an issue downstream or damages downstream caused by dam operation, dam misoperation, partial complete failure, ultimately that's coming back to the owner. So they really hold, they hold all the risks of giving them, measures to give them the tools to reduce that, make their dam safer should be explored. And then successive pre-event drawdowns for dam public safety is pretty nuanced, as I mentioned. In some cases, these pre-event drawdowns are already happening in a somewhat regulated way through water quality certifications on some hydropower dams. It's also occurring outside the regulations in some areas, and there's some people that feel very exposed for doing it and feel they're doing the right thing. I think that's one of the reasons why this still is introduced. And then to make a meaningful impact here, though, we really need to have just a declaration or authorization to do this, whether you have your plan in place to do this days ahead of it in advance, because you need at least 2 to 3 days in advance to have any meaningful amount of drawdown occur. Anything down in most reservoirs in a safe way, several feet is going to take a couple of days. This is not something that could be instituted during an event or immediately at the start of the rain. It needs to be instituted several days in advance. So kind of have that quality forecasting. There's always the risk that we believe it's going to be bad, the drawdowns are done, or the event misses, and then now you have a bunch of reservoirs that are a little bit lower than we would like, and it's going to take some time to get back to the normal levels.
Yeah, go ahead.
The pre-event drawdowns that are already occurring. Are the owners doing that on their own, making the decision and drawing them down, or is it only when authorized?
I believe there's some that don't really have authorization to do it, so they're just doing it on their own. There are some others that have water quality certification that do work with the flow protection group, the DEC, and communicate and do it with that understanding, although that would understand they're doing it.
Okay, so they're in touch with water quality division.
I would say some are, many aren't.
Some are just doing it because I think it's
The right thing to do.
okay.
They're trying to limit their risk, their exposure, their concern, I think it's all safety benefits doing so. So they're doing it.
So it's a little bit ad hoc right now.
I think that's fair to say. Yeah, I'd say probably if you go across the 1,100 dams, probably most are not doing it. Yeah, but there's definitely a subset that are doing it. Well, not our area, but many of the dams that are FERC regulated have water quality certifications part of their license, and they have an operation band that allows them to operate within several foot band, and what's pretty common. I think they'll communicate with water quality flow protection. They'll bring the water level to the lower part of their band. It might only be a foot lower than, it might only be 1 foot drawdown, not very much, or they might discuss going a little bit lower given the circumstances, and then that's not technically covered, I guess. So again, so back to some other considerations. So just lack of pre-planning can lead to either inefficiencies in the process or unintended consequences. In our opinion, control should be in place to both balance public safety and environmental impacts. So those are some of the main considerations that we see. So this my other couple slides are just the language that the that was presented to you. I testified in front of government operations on April 16th on this bill before this additional language was added. We recommended that some sort of drawdown plan be considered to make this more orderly and efficient and process with some controls in place. They requested that we provide language. I worked with DEC management to develop some language, and we sent it to legislative council, who inserted it. Largely what we recommended is what is in here now. So on this one slide, you know, again, I think really the focus of this is not is flood driven, pre-flood driven concerns to bring the water level down. It's not necessarily all emergency conditions where we have a uncontrolled seepage develops, or there's some other deficiency that develops at the dam and we do emergency drawdown. I see that that's a different case. This is really about pre-storm event drawdowns that are doing that as a protective measure, hopefully build storage in our reservoirs to hopefully attenuate, store some floodwaters, hopefully reduce flooding from impacts. So I see this is different. We have a way to handle those other cases where we have a dam that has a true deficiency, and we need to bring the water level down right now to remove that potential energy the reservoir, you know, represents, and to protect public safety. And that's sort of a different process than what this is.
Let me ask you about that. So one of the things that I have been thinking about is how this is under the emergency powers of the governor chapter, and that that's in the case of an all hazards event. And so I guess I'm thinking about the timing, because this is in anticipation of an all hazards event versus now we have a disaster. And
It's just too late if it's
Right.
we have a disaster.
once you're there, exactly, so maybe that I guess I'm not sure if this part belongs in the chapter about the emergency powers of the governor, or if it belongs in 10 VSA chapter 43. Does that make sense?
The concern I have with putting in 10 VSA chapter 43 is that only handles non-hydropower, non-federal dams.
Okay.
So there's gonna be a whole subset of dams that aren't gonna be included, and so we're gonna not necessarily solve the problem this is trying to solve by putting it there. I believe this initiative was actually, this initial language came from a dam owner who has this very challenge of not really being allowed to do this and doing it anyways, and so I think that the intent is this covers that wider spectrum of dams, not just the ones covered in chapter 43.
And then for a FERC covered dam, their drawdown plan would still, I assume, have to function within the boundaries of their FERC agreement. You know, if they have a 1 foot band, then their drawdown plan would allow them to go to that lower.
Which that document that puts that 1 foot ban is that water quality certification that can be waived, and then they have a drawdown plan that would say, we're gonna try to get to 3 feet or whatever like reasonable number is, and here's how we're gonna do it. And the same people look at, I think I envision this as dam safety in most cases, and then the same people look at the water quality certification look at that too. And you know, like
I see.
general degree of, you know, this reasonableness, this reasonable plan is, you know, to have the controls in place to make sure we're not gonna, it can't really go wrong in either direction, and if it all sort of is there, it makes sense, and kind of follows those basic provisions.
Yeah.
Then we have a plan in place, and plus we also, part of the plan is, on the next slide here, is requiring the owner to actually do the hydraulic modeling to prove what the health benefit is, because I think there's, as I said, I think we need to be somewhat realistic. I think there's certainly dams where this would be hugely beneficial. I think there's many dams where if you did the modeling, you'd find out that the amount of storage that's available is so small that it gets filled up so quickly in the rising leg of a flood hydrograph that it provides inches, maybe not even that much benefit. So you know, it's probably not, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. So we're doing that to prove out the benefit of doing so is I think an important step, because probably shouldn't be doing it if it doesn't provide a benefit. And if it does provide a benefit, understanding what that benefit is actually kind of makes it measurable and allows us to kind of understand better really what we're actually doing, rather than just kind of ad hoc doing it in a bunch of places hoping it's helping, but not really knowing.
Sorry, I interrupted you if you want to keep moving.
Yeah, yeah, no problem. So these provisions were in our proposed language. This was develop that drawdown plan. Again, as I mentioned, I think a very important piece is this modeling. Many dam owners already have this modeling that could be purposed for this state, so I don't think that's a super heavy lift. Also dam owner communications, I think is a very important element. If they're gonna start these drawdowns several days in advance, they should be contacting downstream communities, let them know there's gonna be increased flows in the river to our officials because we're doing this drawdown plan and you know, in preparation of this potential storm event. And so those kind of communications pre-event and then also, you know, during and post-event. Identifying really what their drawdown rates are, what their outflows, and what their ramping rates are. Ramping rates are referenced to how quickly they open and close gates. You know, there needs to be some reasonableness for how quickly and how slowly they do that. How and drawdown rates, again, you draw a reservoir down, earth embankment dam, you can actually draw the water level down fast enough, you can cause damage to the dam. So there needs to be some thought as to what their drawdown rate is. We don't want to cause other issues on the dam, to the dam trying to do this. The target drawdown elevation, so we're not necessarily going down to fully drained reservoir. We have a target that we can reasonably get to in several days with the equipment that's available. We can do that safely. We can do that without overwhelming the downstream channel, and that amount does actually provide some level of flood benefit. So sort of that's kind of pre-thought through. And then on the backside, a rebuild plan. I mean, I think in most cases, if we have a major flood event, that drawn down reservoir, or, you know, I'm thinking it's probably in the order of several feet, would like to be refilled during the flood. But in the event that we have that situation where the flood event passes by and misses that particular drainage basin and the reservoir is down several feet,
Yeah,
a plan on how they're gonna bring that water level back up. Because you can't necessarily just shut all the gates and just start refilling the pond and shut the water off to the downstream channel. So that needs to be thought through as to how they would handle that scenario. And then just some basic monitoring, reporting requirements, and then also documentation of plan updates and revisions. So basically just doing this in an orderly fashion to make sure that, yeah, we know what's going on, we know it has a benefit, we know it's being done, you know, orderly, efficiently and safely. So that's really the intent of this proposal, this addition.
I think you, I have one other question for you, just feel like I ought to understand the words, the difference between hydrologic and hydraulic.
So hydrologic usually is a study of how rain falls on a watershed. So that would be like showing the drainage basin above the dam and how rain goes from the sky to the ground and then eventually gets to the dam. And then hydraulics is specifically how the water travels in the rivers and how the dam actually performs, the actual how water passes through the dam and how it works in the river channels upstream and downstream of the dam.
Great. Makes sense. Cool. Any other questions for Mr. Green?
no, actually, I think that I've been in the short languages. Better than a lot of us. So. And it's in the interest of the dam owners to have this plan. So you're gonna tend to want to do it, so they have this option.
Right, as I give them the options to do it, it gives them has the sideboard on it to also it protects everybody else will protect themselves too, having this approved plan, they don't have to follow the plan that they're responsible, so they want to.
So, coming back to this question though, that we were just discussing earlier about how if you don't have this plan, then you can't do preemptive drawdown. Or actually, I guess I have two questions. Maybe I'll start with the other one. People are allowed to do this now, or no?
Not technically, I'd say that the dams that have, the FERC regulated dams that have a water quality certification that have that operation ban.
Yep.
They're allowed to go to the bottom part of that ban, which may or may not really be what you'd be doing on the same level that you'd be doing here.
Okay,
And then everybody else technically not allowed to do it.
Okay.
It's happening in the landscape in some cases, you know, on the sly, yes it is.
okay. Okay, that is helpful because I had heard that it was happening, but it's really just that the FERC dams are operating within the band and they're maybe going to the bottom of that.
Going to the bottom part of that
Yeah,
band,
okay.
which.
And so if they want to do any additional drawdown legally, they need to have, or either the FERC dams or anybody else, they need to have this plan in place. So you are right, okay, and then because the emergency powers of the governor waive permits, they, if it's not a FERC dam, there's no permit to waive, or.
It's not a FERC dam. Snre dam basically is to run a river conditions of the dam, meaning that what comes in has to go out and within the restrictions of what the existing infrastructure is. So you're not allowed to manipulate the water level or manipulate flows. So technically, that would be a drawdown, we can manipulate things.
Gotcha.
There are a small subset of dams, but not to confuse, but there's a small subset of dams that have historic winter drawdowns that are allowed to do, and that's not what we're talking about here, I just don't want to confuse. There are a couple dams that do a couple foot winter drawdown that are still allowed through this other provision, and that's not all we're talking about, but.
Yeah.
So yeah, any any artificial manipulation is technically not allowed, again, doesn't happen on landscape, it doesn't been, but there's also people that don't do it because they know they're not allowed to, so.
Right.
It's both sides, and I just want to be clear, I'm not an expert on all water quality certifications of every FERC dam, but. Some have a band that they go to low part of, I believe some don't have a band that go, a low part band to really go to, so I'm not sure it's fair to say that like every FERC facility goes a low part of their band. I think some don't really have a low end in their certification, so don't really have that ability, but that's my understanding.
Yes,
So
but
this gets it, it's interesting stuff, actually. So, so beyond going down to the low point that they're allowed to go to, the ban.
Yep.
It requires theoretically now that you have a plan and that the government declare. Otherwise, the dam owners, even with a plan, can't make that decision on their own, right? They can draw down to the low level of their allowed.
Yeah.
But they theoretically can't go below that absent something from the governor.
Theoretically, well, again, if there's a dam safety deficiency, they can work with their regulator and they can bring it down. If there's a non-related to a flood event or even related to a flood event, there's a dam safety deficiency that develops. Safest thing to do is get this level down now, even well beyond several feet, but let's get this thing down because we have to, because we don't want the dam to fail. That's a different situation. That would be handled through the regulatory process that we have, and under our unsafe dam process, we would come in and allow that right away, because that has to happen. That's different. That's different than this. This is, again, it's like a pre-event. This is a preemptive. Everything's working fine, but it's a preemptive measure to hopefully gain some attenuation of flood protection, not like an emergency. Dam's about to fail, drawdown scenario.
one other question about the guardrails on this. So, I mean, I have all the faith that players, at the current time would make good faith efforts on all of this, but just anticipating, because this is not something that we do during a declared emergency, it's before a declared emergency theoretically. So it says to allow dams within the state to draw down water levels in anticipation of a flood event that is likely to cause substantial damage or injury to persons or property. How does the decision get made that is the case?
That's one of the challenges of this is I'm not sure. The timing of this is very important because it has to.
Yeah.
That finding has to be found in time several days in advance to make this possible. So that is one challenge I see with this. Process is.
Like, how do we define
Needs
that
to be,
this is happening?
right, so and it's, weather predictions are variable, they get probably more accurate the closer you get to the event, but then, 6 days, you think you have an idea of not necessarily a very good one, and it only takes down like 6 hours before you know what's gonna happen. And so, but you need to be in that several day range to actually institute this and make positive traction on getting that event, get the event down.
It makes me wonder if we need some language, even just to clarify, like, as determined by Secretary of Natural Resources. So just so that regardless of, whether that's like the right or the wrong person, like we know who to look to say, this is happening. Does that make sense?
I think so, I mean, I think the idea is certainly the agency and, diligent dam owners are paying very close attention to the weather and are looking weeks out in advance. It's a major event, usually like a week out, it's already starting. That's not necessarily happening at that level, but that's still on the ground level, that certainly happens.
Sure, well, and so as it's happening organically, who is making that call? I mean, we could just codify whoever is making that judgment currently.
Yeah, I mean, apparently it's an individual dam owner paying attention to, boy, I want to do this, I'm either gonna talk to the flood protection group, I'm gonna do it, or I'm just gonna do it.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
Uh,
So the flow protection group,
again, they're the ones that write the water quality certifications or follow the water quality certification for everything, so. They're not making the decision to do it, but they're the ones that are being notified that we're going to the bottom part of our band or it'll beyond.
is that specific to our permits?
That's huge, yeah. Dams by the water quality certification, once you have birth licenses or other licenses.
Okay. Okay, great. Any other guardrails you feel like might be useful on this language? Or,
I don't think so, I think we hit the major ones we thought were the minimum requirements that kind of provide what's needed to
okay,
make this work.
and any other comments or questions for Mr. Green? Okay, great, thank you so much.
Very much.
I may just flag for the GovOps committee that they may want to consider adding some language about who is the one that makes the judgment about that a flood event that's described here is coming. Unless there's thoughts or objections to that. Any other discussion on this provision? Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Super. All right, so we're gonna switch gears one more time this morning to talk about H230, which is again, it's a preview of language that is moving through the House that we could potentially add to 231, the Fish and Wildlife Technical Correction Bill. So we're gonna hear about it and see what we want to do. So we'll start with Mr. Grady, or actually maybe we should start with, I'm sorry, with Ms. Rep. Sakowitz to tell us about this. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Representative Cyclist from Randolph. Get on my notes here, so we're gonna invest something for me. So H230 was introduced as a request of the Fish and Wildlife Department. And as the Environment Committee spent quite a bit of time on reviewing the bill. It's an important wildlife bill. We very much like to see it move along. First couple of sections are concerned fishing. One section would create a free fishing weekend over Labor Day weekend, and another section would change the fees paid to the Fish and Wildlife Department for fishing tournaments, lowering the fees on some, but increasing the fees on bigger ones. The next two sections would increase the penalties for certain big game violations, but also move most other violations from criminal to civil, keeping most violations out of the courts. We've heard that the courts already have plenty to do about certain kinds of violations occupying their time, and the committee agreed that it was appropriate for many of these violations to be just civil violations with some exceptions, which you'll hear a lot more about, I'm sure. The bill would further restrict the taking of most reptiles and amphibians. We also heard a lot of testimony that these creatures are not doing well. They're not doing well globally. They're not doing well in Vermont. They are not. They have very little, if any, protection currently in Vermont, and this bill would give them the protection that they really need and deserve. And again, there would be exceptions to the taking of that the commissioner would be able to create rules to allow the taking of certain reptiles and amphibians for certain kinds of purposes, which seem appropriate. We also have a section of the bill that would prohibit the sale of pond slider turtles, which are a common pet, but they are also an invasive species, and people sometimes release them into the wild, and they cause various kinds of problems. And then next parts of the bill clarify that people have to get permits from the Commissioner of Fish and Wildlife to import, transport, or possess reptiles and amphibians. this seems to be already covered in general statute, but this was there to really make sure that it's very clear that these creatures are protected from sway. And it also prohibits the use of wild animals for most commercial purposes, unless otherwise permitted. So other commercial purposes can be permitted, but this bill would sort of establish a floor on what's allowed. And then there are sections that concern threatened and endangered species. Vermont really does a very good job of protecting our threatened and endangered species. This bill would tighten up our regulations a little bit. It would it would introduce some prohibitions around intrastate commerce for these species, and it would also prohibit the import or export of threatened and endangered species from Vermont. And then the other piece of this bill would do concerning threatened and endangered species is allow the creation of a sort of a sublist of species. Certain endangered species are valuable. And when certain kinds of permitting takes place, the locations of these species is then made public. And so this bill, this section of this bill would allow the commissioner to keep that kind of location data for these very particular species confidential. And then the last section of the bill, we have a part of the statute where farmers can get reimbursed up to $5,000 for certain types of crop and other damage that's caused by deer and bear. This was actually a really interesting part of statute because this wasn't obvious to me at first, but this statute was put in place not so much as a way to help farmers as it was a way to help keep land open for hunting. And so the idea here is that farmers who do not post their land against hunting are entitled to this kind of reimbursement through this. But the committee heard that this law is seldom used, has not really had the intended effect. That there are other more appropriate ways to mitigate the losses, these kinds of losses that farmers have. During the 3-year period from 2022 to 2024, we heard that just 4 farmers actually use this program. And what we heard from the Fish and Wildlife Department is that this program takes away pretty valuable resources from their operations. And it's not really it's not a core part of what they do. And so between it being something that's, taking funds and other resources away from their operations and also not doing so in a very effective way, but we heard what they would like to see that program cease. And this will take effect July 1 of this year.
So, thank you. I have a question about this last part. So, this is this program that we're proposing to do away with here is a kind of reimbursement for farmers if they have crop damage. Is that the idea?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Yes, go ahead.
You're taking testimony from any farm, of people that might
We took testimony from someone from the Farm Bureau. And she was not terribly favorable about taking this out. But we decided as a committee that given, I'm saying again, given how little use the program is, how little use the program has gotten, that there really ought to be more, there are a lot more effective ways to get at that problem than through Fish and Wildlife.
and more effective ways.
We heard that, that crop insurance is one way that farmers do this. We also know that, there are also cases where farmers, rely on compensation rather than preventing, such damage to happen in the first place. So part of the worry, the way I understand it, is that if you have this out where you can say, oh, somebody came and damaged my crops, I can get compensated for it. It's a bit of a disincentive to take the measures that most farmers, I think, do take to minimize the damage from these creatures.
Yes, go ahead. Oh, unless you just
This one, that has a lot of bear damage. So you're saying there are only 4 instances of.
There were four farming operations that put in claims for this during that 3-year period.
Thank you.
Senator?
Section 13, why do you have? Why the effective date of January 1, 2027 for the taking of reptiles and amphibians?
That is section 13.
Who are we protecting?
Oh, let's go on the terms. So section 13, I wonder if we have the same copy of
Maybe we're not.
the bill. I think I know where that confusion comes from. So the bill will take effect July 1, 2025. The 2027 date does occur in another part of the bill, and that's the date where for reptiles and amphibians, right now there's no protections for those creatures, unless they're already threatened or endangered. And so the bill would create a blanket protection for that group as a group, with this whole is a very vulnerable group. But however, we know that there are people who do use these species. We took testimony that there are people who like to capture snapping turtles for food. People also eat a couple different species of frogs for their frog legs.
Okay.
And we extended the date for the prohibition until 2027 to give the commission time to make rules around the takings of those or any other species
Okay.
that might be appropriate.
Okay.
Good. Yes, go ahead.
So what's happening to this bill in the House at this point?
Right now, it's on the notice for House bill.
Oh, so that's why it's drafting. Okay.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Yeah. And question about section 3, the fines for big game violations are going up. Can you tell us a little bit about why?
My understanding, and probably a question best for the department's counsel, but so please correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that these have not been updated in quite a while, and this is really part of the general, fines go up over time with inflation.
Okay. All right. Okay, any other questions? All right, super, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, and so on this topic, let's hear from Village Council. Mr. Grady, welcome.
So that was a pretty good walkthrough. Do you want me to do it again?
Well, if there's anything to add.
Thanks for reading some stuff for him.
Why? I think one of the big issues will be the taking of reptiles and amphibians, so I just want to highlight why it's being proposed. So right now, under the Fish and Wildlife Board's rules, wild animals may be taken at any time by any lawful means by any person holding a valid license for such taking, or by any person permitted by law. And a hunting license allows a person to take wild animals set by trapping for those species that acquire. And so basically you can go shoot or take or any other way, kill reptiles and amphibians. If you have a valid hunting license, there's no other limitation other than with threatened endangered species. So the committee heard testimony regarding that. They were concerned about that. They adopted or drafted section 6 to provide that a person shall not intentionally take a reptile or amphibian in the state unless authorized by the rules. Intentionally was something that they were specific about adding. They didn't want someone who runs over in state with their lawnmower or a frog in the road to be considered in violation. And they also wanted to give the commissioner time to adopt rules to allow for appropriate taking, including for collection or possession for commercial use, export, or sale. The taking of those that are known as most discussion.
Hold on a second, we're live, looks like we had a little blip there for a second, but. Looks like we're back away, it's amazing, sorry, thank you.
Um,
Who knows?
Yeah.
I'll check.
and then the other. I guess the other section of focus on is the bear. Here. There is still discussion in the House going on. The Ag Committee may look at this or not. To provide their input.
Which section?
Section 12. This is a long-standing issue that ever since I've been here, the department has really disliked this because they don't think it's their responsibility. If a farm is going to be compensated, they believe that the Agency of Agriculture should pay for it, Agency of Agriculture's budget. And instead, this comes out of the Fish and Wildlife Trust Fund, which is already under significant pressure. And until 2023, there wasn't a $5,000 limit on it. But I think one year you had to make a $200,000 line item appropriation for one farmer. 150. So it's been a significant dislike of the department for a long time, and they would prefer that if it's going to continue, they would prefer to come out of the Agency of Agriculture's budget, and it's not going to come out of the Agency of Ag's budget. They don't want it to come from them.
How is Agency of Ag funded? Through permits?
Through mostly general fund, but they also have significant special funds that are paid for through registration fees on things like pesticides and seed. So that's 2:30. I don't have much else to add than what Rep. Sackwitz provided. I can give you updates on your wakeboat letter and S29 if you would like.
I do have a question about this, I, just as a preview, had sent this to Mike Covey to say, do you have any comments about this from Vermont Traditions Coalition? And he had flagged, it's on page 9, section E. So I realize everyone hasn't seen his comments yet, it is posted, I think, on our website at this point. But he had some concerns about this language here. One question for you about this, so this is not specific to snakes and frogs and such, this is in general, I think. It's about not take, collect, possess, sell, import any wild animal, bird or animal or oppress their house for commercial purposes unless authorized by statute. Rules of the board, rules of the commissioner. So basically it's saying unless it's already allowed explicitly, you can't do it. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so I think, going back to what I discussed, any person can take a wild animal if they have a valid hunting license unless otherwise specified. And so that is authorized both by statute and rule. So that doesn't require a permit right now, or it's not prohibited right now. It may be the commissioner may adopt rules which are authorized under this section for the commissioner to do.
Mhm.
But right now, I think most taking is authorized by statute or rule.
So what examples like taxidermy? The sale of taxidermy or making of lures be prohibited by this language.
Making lures with what?
Parts of an animal, like the scorpion nails or.
So statute provides that when you take an animal, wild animal, say a deer, the deer is in your possession and you can do with the deer. Not everything that you would want, but largely you can use the parts and for your own purposes. And then you can sell that. So I don't see an issue with taxidermy. Unless the commissioner adopted rules to address it. As for lures. Again, I don't see an issue with that. I think. I have to think about that one a little bit more.
Okay.
It's
for commercial purposes. Well, we have another question from Senator Carney, so we can come back to that.
So. I know that we don't have these in Vermont, but a couple of years ago, we did a bill about rhino parks. So that was, I think we prohibited that. Do you remember this? Were you thinking about that?
covered down with parts.
Yes, exactly. So that would be.
Right, but that's specific to the definition of covered animal underneath that.
Okay, and it was only animals that are not actually in Vermont, right? Weren't they all like?
I think that's correct. I mean, it was adopted to address a loophole in the Federal Endangered Species Act, which the Endangered Species Act regulates interstate trade in those parts. Whereas intrastate, there weren't wasn't great specificity for the trade of some of those animals, like the pangolin or
It was a rhino. I remember rhino horns were part of it too. Yeah, okay, but that would be an example of where statute says you can't do it. Oh, I guess this is unless authorized. I was thinking it was less not authorized, but okay.
But they're with wild game is defined, it is any wildlife, but they're not present. Like,
Yeah.
there's no pangolin.
There's no rhinos. There used to be a camel here.
There's
Oh,
still,
that.
there's still no,
There's another one.
Good.
Snre, did you have your hand up?
Any other questions for Mr. Ingredients, please? Okay, thank you, appreciate that. And I believe we also have, Mr. Groff here, Fish and Wildlife. Yeah, welcome. Thank you.
Well, I have a little presentation, is that okay?
Oh, yes.
Have some slides?
Did you accept the zoning?
Yes, I did.
Oh, yes. You have to. You have to request to be admitted, so you need to click on the Zoom link.
Okay, I'm sorry, I should have.
That's okay.
Oh, so it's just through the Zoom, so,
To internet, to get at internet access?
oh, to get internet
Oh,
access?
there's a public Wi-Fi.
State house public.
I'm just gonna resend the link to you.
Now, I accepted, so,
You accepted, okay.
yeah. Do I wait for a link that can?
It should be in the email that you accepted.
Let's see, you.
So what is the status of this building, the passing house?
It is, can be on the floor today. Okay, so we have the option to add it to 231, or we can just let it travel on its own and see how controversial it is. So that's what we're hearing about, mainly today. The very least, it's good background.
Luke,
Yes.
send me your presentation. If you send it.
I have it. That helps.
Can't put
Oh.
pen drive.
So that
Was it just forwarded to me?
So
I'll put it on the screen.
let's a few things to say. Big short version though is that I think we might make one recommendation to GovOps about because it's not the timing of a drawdown happens before a declared emergency might occur. And so it just says, you know, in the event that there's the anticipation of a flood that would cause significant damage.
Can you do
then
that?
you can do
Yeah, I
this,
have
but who
your-
decides?
Yeah.
when a significant flood like this is going, it's energy. And so I was recommending to GovOps that they add some language about, like, as determined by who, like, just who gets to make the call that this is coming, and you can start doing these drawdown plans. And there was we did talk about where in statute it should live, and it made sense that it was not the governor dam stuff that we were more familiar with, particularly because that section is just related to non-power, not like non-FERC non-PUC dams. And so, and this would apply more generally to all dams. And the other, some of the, I'm forgetting. Oh, there was because I had this understanding that dams are allowed to do this now. And turns out that's not quite the case. So FERC dams have a band in which they can, of levels that they can operate within. And so they might be some that they don't all have this, but some of them they might have like a foot band that they can operate in. So currently they might draw down to the lower end of that band, but that's it. And so this would allow them more drawdown if they have a plan in place.
Even if they're FERC dams that we don't regulate.
Even if they're FERC dams, because part of the issue with the governor's emergency orders or it's sometimes slow, you know, in the case of a disaster, he can waive those. Even the federal, that's what it sounds, which is, that's an interesting question, which we did not ask, like, oh, you're allowed to waive a federal permit.
Yeah, because there are some dams that are FERC regulated and that's federal.
Yeah, actually, we have Mr. Grady here. We can just, you would be the right person to ask about this, yes.
I've never heard that the governor can waive federal restriction.
Yeah.
So that was something that Ben Green talked about, the ability to waive the federal dam. So that might be something.
I don't think so. I don't think the governor can waive federal regulations even during an emergency.
There is that ban you were talking about that gives federal dams the ability to manage in times of pressure. But I've never heard that the governor can waive the FERC license.
Right. So maybe we should flag that for them as well, but this is not. Yeah, you may not get to waive a federal dam even in the case of an emergency, or a federal permit in the case of an emergency.
Yeah.
And might be putting her on the spot, but she used to staff the dam program.
Do you have any comments about this, Ms.?
I don't. I'm not sure what that is. I'm gonna.
Okay, no worries. Okay, no worries. So, but in any case, for the non-FERC dams, the permit is that the inflow has to match the outflow, like that's just status quo. And I think that is our rule. And so, that's not FERC related, and so might be able to waive that. In the case of, so even if it's not, it would be worth exploring, like, does this apply to FERC dams? But if not, it still may be useful for some of these other dams.
That would still apply to licensing for 401s.
For your 401 still going until the class.
Right, regardless, for it's just.
Right, well, I don't know how much 401 became a topic.
That was another thing.
Well, no, I don't know what they talked about. You still have to comply with your 401.
Right, and that's a state rule that applies to the inflow versus outflow.
Right. So that could be potentially waived in an emergency.
I think that's what you said. you were recommending makes sense, but I do need flagging for them, that they just don't apply to federal, right, we can't for federal
Just for high.
regulation.
Yeah.
We might like that now.
It's not a required.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So we'll flag both of you.
Yeah,
Okay. It's a good call.
You there?
No,
Why, okay, this room is kind of cursed, so.
it is just for us.
It's technologically cursed now.
Yeah. Yeah. Luddite elves.
All right, I sent it to you, said my first one failed for some reason.
Okay.
Not getting it, yeah.
I apologize, folks, I
No worries.
technical difficulties here.
It's all good. We can also have you back to if it doesn't have all the work, but up to you.
Yeah.
I think that you are actually our last witness for the day, so we could take a break until you're ready.
Don't
have it.
That works for me, I think we're just in limbo between internet connections, I think.
Got you. Does it seem like it's gonna be on the short end, like just a couple minutes, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's right here, I just don't know how to get it there.
Yeah. Well, we'll keep hanging out. Well, let's wait a little bit.
do you want an update on salt?
Oh, sure, yes. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So the Senate Judiciary Committee would propose an amendment changing the limitation on liability to an affirmative defense.
Mhm.
And the advocates all agreed to support that.
Yes, okay.
Both the Association for Justice and Environmental Advocate.
I just think.
They would want the BMPs to be adopted by rule.
Wi-Fi.
And they
We've actually.
would want to file each 86's
And I'll say.
inventory on salt storage instead of the cover requirement.
To that.
Sorry, can you hang on a second? It's trying to happen. Sorry, I just want to make sure I can hear you. Sorry, go ahead.
So they didn't really take a position on it, but in their kind of informal discussion. They would prefer 86's inventory on salt storage and not the mandated cover.
Mm-hmm.
But they said that was an issue for you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it, really.
So what's, in a nutshell, the difference between the two different legal, because doesn't the House have a different one in their house?
Also the limitation on liability like you had when 29 came out here. And in that case, the burden is on the plaintiff to show that the limitation of liability does not apply.
Mhm.
With an affirmative defense, the burden is on the defendant to show that they deserve the defense from the negligence claim.
Okay, do you know which the New Hampshire law has?
It's a limitational liability.
It'll be. So would the burden of proof on the defense, wait, what is it called, burden of
Affirmative defense.
the affirmative defense, does that have, they would have to show that they followed the BMPs and apply the salt in the way that the BMPs mandate, and so it would be a sort of steeper.
It's basically putting in to statute the common law. You establish what the standard of care is, the best management practice.
Mhm,
You establish that you've been following that
mhm.
and that any harm was caused by you following the standard of care.
Mhm.
And then you are free from liability. As
It's very much like. That's good, the standard of care, is it the same thing?
well, it's the affirmative defense. The term affirmative defense isn't used often, if at all, in Vermont statutes for civil liability.
Uh-huh,
But they have things like standard of care and healthcare and,
Yeah.
and other. Where it is an affirmative defense.
right. You prove that
You prove that you did met the standard and you're free from liability.
Right, that they died anyway, but you did anything you were supposed to do.
Yeah.
Okay,
So that got a kumbaya from the advocates. So
as
I will have to redraft the whole thing, but it's.
it makes it.
Because H86 is in it and S29 is in it. And so I would have to redraft the whole thing,
Oh, gosh.
so it's not a big deal. And Mike is here on the covered parts. What are you worried about with taxidermy?
I'm worried that section B is like really broad and it's gonna capture things that we may not be trying to capture.
But you can use the parts appropriately if it's not otherwise allowed for disposal or waste, but you can use the parts for commercial use. If you can sell the pellet, you can do the taxidermy animal and sell that.
Well, my understanding is that it's also redundant. So.
But what it does is it gives you the ability to adopt the rules to limit that, but there's no current prohibitions on that.
I think I'm gonna read that, there's something that says that.
Says unless authorized by statute, rules,
So it's a prohibition until rules are created, not.
right, but statute allows you to take any wildlife,
Is it appropriate for us to be having this side? by side?
Sorry, thank you. It's a good question. I'm interested in the conversation, so I was gonna let it continue, but, because we had been talking about 2:30, and particularly I brought up the concerns that you had. So, as long as we're all clear that we're having this conversation, I think it's okay. But would love to.
Did you want to look at the language? That's there, but I think it's the paragraph you were concerned about.
And well, since we're here and having this conversation, and actually, if would you like to explain your comments a little further or more formally, Mr. Covey?
I can do that if you'd like.
Okay, while we're waiting for Mr. Groff, can we have you shift out of that seat for now? And Mr. Covey, if you don't mind joining us, I mean, so your comments are online, but if you have, so we're shifting back to 2:30 or a different part of 2:30 anyway. So yeah, please tell us about your comments.
So for the record, Mike Covey, Executive Director of the Vermont Traditions Coalition. And looking over this language, one thing that just popped up as a flag for me was section 8 on page 19 of draft 4.2. So that states a person shall not take, collect, possess, sell, import, or export any wild bird or animal or parts thereof that are alive for commercial purposes unless authorized by statute, the rules of the board, rules of the commissioner, or a permit from the commissioner. So my concern with that is that it's so complete and broad that I feel there would have to be a statute authorizing or a rule authorizing sale of any wild animal part, period. And so, my questions are with that, how would that impact taxidermy? How would that impact jewelry, say? People sell squirrel scales to vets to make lures with. People sell fur and feathers to folks to tie flies with. So I think that there's just pitfalls within that we may not have acknowledged in the conversation. And I would like to see those avoided. So I've had a conversation with the department about this. And my understanding, and I don't want to speak for the department, but is that they feel that there's some redundancy here and a lot of this is already covered, or a lot of the whole of the sections already covered. So we could strike that section. I don't see a negative impact in that. Alternatively, what we could do is push back the implementation date. There's a section in here about reptiles, that the implementation date is July 1st, I believe, 2027. If we push back the implementation date for 2 years, that gives time to have those conversations and create rules around it. But even that leaves potential for things to still be missed, and I'm not sure what I'm not sure what the value of section E is in terms of what's the problem we're solving, right? So if there's not really a problem we are solving here, which I don't think there is, then the easiest thing is simply to strike. And I don't believe there's any prohibition, and I could be wrong on this, and Mr. O'Grady would correct me, but I think that the commissioner could likely make rules, through the board on these topics as they come up. I think, is there authority broad enough to do that, Mr. O'Grady?
Go ahead.
For,
Yes, that's.
for fish and wild game,
Right.
and then for all other wild animals. You might wanna. I agree that this is redundant as it is currently drafted. But I don't know if the department has other rulemaking authority to address commercial use of wildlife that aren't wild game or fish.
So my response to that would be that unless we can lawfully take the animal, then it's, there are already other laws being broken simply to take and possess. So I think that further cements the redundancy of this, and in the interest of time, the easiest thing is simply to remove that section.
Question, yes.
I don't know, that sounds fun to me, but do you have problems with the herpetology parts of
I
it?
think it was well done.
Okay,
I don't have any issue with anything else in the bill, just.
just that one paragraph,
That
that's
was
the
a
only
flag
thing.
for me, just because those were the immediate things that popped into my head. I'm sure nobody was thinking about squirrel tails being used in lures and flies. Or feathers or whatnot. And I'm equally certain, because we all know in this building, whenever we say this is easy, that's the death knell, right? So I'm sure there are things that I'm not thinking of, those were just what we immediately talking about.
Questions? Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. And so just switching back to Mr. Graff, just want to check in. Again, so we're getting down, we're having a little bit more limited amount of time.
I apologize.
But it's okay, no
I think it
worries.
made its way through for me, for him. But
Oh, so we might actually have it? Okay, because if we do, amazing. But we could also reschedule because we understand that we only have like 10 minutes at this point.
suggest you.
Well, I know you travel a long way to get here.
Yes.
So if you have,
You just thought about the considerations for,
I think your presentation is helpful and I can cover the considerations if, and you can join remotely if you need to.
You can bring
In
remote.
the future. You can remote.
oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
We have-
while you're here, I think it would just be great if you walked through
I'm-
the information on reptiles and amphibians.
excellent.
Yeah, let's do that. That's fine with me.
Apologize.
Oh, no worries. I'm sorry that it's difficult. So we'll plan to have you in again sometime soon.
Excellent.
Okay.
Thank you for having me. I look forward to-
Thank you. Okay, sounds good. So with that, we are done with our witnesses for the day. I just want to flag, so Senator Bongers and I had a conversation about possibly asking the DEC to issue some emergency rulemaking around wake boats for the summer, and with the prospect of spread of invasive species. So I asked Mr. O'Grady to draft something, and so I don't know if you want to give us an update on that.
I sent it to you,
Okay.
like tens and 50.
Okay,
Um,
so anyway, I just wanted to flag that this is something that I'm working on, happy to show everybody and see what you think. Yes.
Can I ask you a question? Because actually this exchange has me confused too. Because what you're talking about is basically the home lake rule,
Yes,
essentially.
yes.
I thought there was already, what's the status of the home lake? Is there something written already?
We're not enforcing it.
That's, there was, that's what I thought.
it's in the rule,
Yeah,
but it's not being implemented because they don't have adequate decontamination stations. So they're just not enforcing.
so even if we did require them to do it, we couldn't enforce it.
No, so what you would ask is then not to allow them to move from their home lake.
Because they can travel between
I
lakes.
see.
They might have a home lake, but they can go to any other lake that is where it's permitted, where it's allowed.
Okay,
Yeah, and so just the idea would be for this summer, you have to stay in your home lake. Don't.
I see, so that's it. Okay,
Your rule's gonna have to address things like movement for maintenance, et cetera, or movement because you're leaving the state.
Right.
But that's up to the rule.
buy a new camp on a different lake or so.
Yeah,
I'm open to that conversation. All of the testimony we tested for on this committee has been lopsided, so one side.
sure.
And before we do anything, we need to get some people in here that are from the other side of the conversation as well.
We could have a field trip.
Just go walk away from inaction. Oh my gosh. Further.
Give you names or something?
Yeah, that would be
Okay,
great.
okay.
Yeah, that would be very helpful, because I'm unaware. Those folks are. Senator Williams.
Just a curiosity question, what's it called? Legislatively, to get that, rule of emergency rule.
This would just be a letter urging them to adopt emergency rules, and this is not necessarily something that would need to go to the floor. We would take, if we wanted it to come from the committee, we'd vote on it as a straw poll in this room. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yes.
That's, I mean, you're just asking them to go to emergency rule. Emergency rules available for when there's an imminent threat to public health, safety, or resources. It's only in effect for 180 days. And the intent was that the agency will adopt a permanent rule. The testimony yesterday, I think from Bethany Sargent, that they intend to reopen the rule already. And that they propose a new rule to ICAR in, did she say September? And so that would probably have the rule available next voting season, 2026 voting season.
I understand why the conservative people are moving the votes.
Yeah,
So I
well,
don't know, you know, and how you're gonna force it, to get people to know.
good question. And we should hear from some other folks as well.
Yeah, somebody stopped me in the cafeteria yesterday.
Oh, really? So wanted to, yeah, open to hearing more testimony and getting names from folks who might want to testify. Okay, great. I think that is it. Then anything else anybody has? Okay, so with that, we will adjourn for the day. Thank you.